Noah Carter sat near the window of room 203 at Lincoln Middle School in Little Rock, Arkansas. His pencil tapped a soft rhythm on the edge of his notebook. It wasn't nerves, it was habit. One his mom always told him to break, but one that helped him think. Outside, the branches swayed slightly in the spring breeze, casting shadows on his desk. Inside, the usual morning chatter filled the room. Students joked, passed notes, and argued softly over last night's homework. But Noah kept his head down. He liked finishing things early, liked having a moment of stillness before the lesson began. The worksheet in front of him was already halfway done, even though the bell hadn't rung yet. He preferred it that way, getting ahead, staying quiet. At the front of the classroom, MS. Caroline Beck adjusted her reading glasses and flipped through her notes. She'd been teaching sixth grade for over 14 years, known for being organized, sharp, and, at least to some, tough but fair. But that only applied if you were on her radar in a good way. Noah? He wasn't. It was never outright disrespect. MS. Beck didn't call him names or raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her disregard was quieter, more surgical. When he raised his hand, she looked past it. When he gave the right answer, she moved on too quickly. When he gave a rare wrong one, she paused a little longer, made sure it stuck. He noticed, and so did a few others. "She barely sees you, man," Jordan Ellis whispered to him once, slouched in the seat beside him. Like he got teacher invisibility or something. Noah had only shrugged. "Guess I do." But today, something was different. MS. Beck kept glancing his way, more than usual. Not like she was waiting to send him to the office, but something else. A kind of anticipation. The class started. History. Today's topic, Sherman's March to the Sea. MS. Beck's voice rang out, clear and controlled as she launched into the lesson. Noah took notes, already familiar with most of the facts. He listened, half-focused, waiting for the usual routine, her calling on the same handful of students. But then, "Noah," she said, eyes locking onto him, her tone crisp, almost casual. "Why don't you take this one?" Heads turned. Noah blinked. She never called on him. He sat up a little straighter, eyes scanning the whiteboard. General Sherman's March, he began slowly, was a Union military campaign through Georgia aimed at crippling the Confederacy's supply lines and morale. MS. Beck nodded. Not bad. The answer was textbook. Accurate, clean, and confident. A few students turned to look at each other, eyebrows raised. Jordan gave him a "what just happened" look. Noah didn't reply. He just went back to his notes. But something had shifted. MS. Beck didn't ignore him for the rest of class. In fact, her eyes kept drifting toward him, studying him. She wasn't looking for a wrong answer anymore. She was looking for something else. And then, just as the bell rang and students began rustling papers and stuffing notebooks into backpacks, she made her move. "Noah," she said over the noise, just loud enough for a few heads to turn. "Stay behind for a moment." Noah slowly zipped up his bag, eyes on her. The room gradually emptied, students glancing back, whispering. He walked up to her desk. "I overheard you the other day," she said, folding her hands neatly. "Talking about your grandfather." Noah frowned. "What about him? You said he was a musician?" Something in her tone changed the air, made it heavier. "Yeah," Noah said carefully. "He was a pianist. Jazz mostly." MS. Beck tilted her head. The corners of her mouth curled, not quite a smirk, but close. "Interesting," she said, tapping her desk. "So, I assume you picked up a thing or two." He hesitated. A little. Her smile widened, but her eyes stayed cold. "Good to know." As he turned to leave, her voice followed him. "Tomorrow," she said. "Let's see what you've got." Noah stopped. "What do you mean?" She pointed toward the old, upright piano in the back of the classroom. Dusty and used. More decoration than instrument. "You'll play something." "For the class." Noah stared. A few students, still lingering outside, peeked back in, watching the exchange. "Why?" he asked. MS. Beck raised an eyebrow. "Why not? You said your grandfather played. I'm sure you've got some of that talent." He knew that tone. It wasn't curiosity. It was something closer to mockery. But he wasn't about to back down. That night, Noah Carter didn't sleep much. He lay in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling that formed crooked little shapes when the light hit them just right. The conversation with MS. Beck played on loop in his mind, louder than the wind rattling the old window frame. Her words weren't a request. They were a test, a setup, and he knew it. He didn't need a crystal ball to see where this was going. She expected him to fail, to stumble, to freeze, to prove whatever story she had already written about him in her head. The quiet kid in the back, the one with the jazz pianist grandfather, maybe, but no proof that he'd inherited any of that magic. But MS. Beck didn't know the full story. Noah stared at the ceiling a while longer, then rolled out of bed and padded softly down the hallway. His mom had gone to bed hours earlier, but the living room was still bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. He sat at the old upright piano, the one his grandfather had rebuilt with his own hands after salvaging it from a church sale. The wood was worn smooth, the keys slightly faded from decades of playing. He didn't turn on the light. He didn't need to. Noah closed his eyes and let his fingers hover above the keys. Then he played. Not loud, not fast, just enough to hear, just enough to remember. He played what his grandfather called a story song, a blend of blues and soul that carried memories between every note, a warm melody that stretched across time like a bridge. He played until the knots in his chest began to loosen, until the doubt softened into determination. By the time he returned to bed, the air felt different. He wasn't scared anymore. The next morning at Lincoln Middle School, it didn't take long for word to spread. Students leaned in whispering by their lockers. Some asked if it was true. Others just gave him curious glances. As Noah stepped into room 203, the air felt heavier than usual. Charged. He took his seat by the window and pulled out his notebook, even though he couldn't concentrate enough to write. "You gonna play today?" Brandon Ricks asked from across the room, his voice loud enough to draw attention. Noah didn't answer. Jordan leaned in. "I didn't know you were a piano guy." Noah kept his eyes down. "There are a lot people don't know." MS. Beck walked in, carrying a thick stack of papers and that same satisfied little smirk she always wore when things went exactly how she wanted. She didn't even acknowledge the students whispering. Instead, she went straight into the morning routine. But Noah wasn't hearing a word of it. He kept drifting ahead, past the lesson, past the clock's slow crawl, straight into the moment she would call on him. And then, "Well, a mess," Beck said, closing her book and glancing up at the wall clock. "We've got a little time before our next subject." "Perfect." She turned slowly toward the piano in the back corner. "Noah," she said, "let's see what you can do." There it was. The moment. The air shifted. Chairs squeaked. Some students turned all the way around in their seats. A few snickered under their breath. Noah didn't move right away. He felt the weight of their stares like a jacket made of bricks. His heartbeat wasn't racing, but it was strong, like a drum roll before the curtain rises. Then he stood. Someone muttered something near the back. A laugh. Maybe two. He ignored them. He already knew their tone. As he walked past MS. Beck's desk, she clasped her hands, watching him with a look that wasn't encouraging, not exactly smug, but definitely confident she knew what was coming. "Play whatever you'd like," she said. Noah stopped in front of the piano. It was old. The finish was scratched, and a few keys were yellowing. He pressed down gently on one key, just to test it. Out of tune. Not much, but enough. Still, it would work. He sat down, placed his hands on the keys, took one breath, then another, and then he began. At first, the sound was soft, gentle, like a whisper weaving through the noise in their heads. A slow blues progression, drawn from memory. Something his grandfather used to play on humid Arkansas afternoons, when the fan was going but the heat still stuck to your skin. Noah's fingers danced across the keys with ease, left hand laying down the rhythm, right hand coaxing out a story. It was more than melody. It was emotion in motion. It was history and love and pain and defiance rolled into each measure. The laughter stopped. Even the students who had snickered sat up straighter. Jordan leaned in, eyes wide. Madison Green, who hadn't said a word to Noah all year, was frozen in place, her mouth slightly open. Noah didn't look at them. He wasn't playing for them. He was playing for himself, for his grandfather, for every moment he was ignored, for every time MS. Beck skipped over him like he was part of the wallpaper. And then he took a risk. He shifted into something more complex, letting his fingers sprint across the keyboard in layered runs, call and response patterns, jazz chords that clashed and resolved with purpose. It was something his grandfather had taught him years ago, something he used to fumble through until one day it clicked. He let loose now. The room, for once, had nothing to say. No one laughed. No one whispered. Even MS. Beck, always in control, had her arms folded tightly across her chest, eyes narrowed, not in authority, but in disbelief. Noah poured himself into the crescendo, pressing the final notes like a declaration. And then, silence. A single note hung in the air, then faded. Noah lifted his hands, let them fall into his lap. The room stayed still for one long breath. Then clap. It came from the back. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the room erupted. Students applauding, some whistling. A few even stood. Jordan leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief. Brandon muttered something like, "Yo, that was insane." Noah didn't smile. He just breathed, not out of nervousness, but release. Power. And for the first time all year, everyone in the room was seeing him for who he really was. Everyone except maybe MS. Beck. She stood motionless by her desk, arms still crossed, face unreadable, as if the clapping wasn't even happening. Noah stayed seated, calm, still. Then finally, she spoke. "Well," she said tightly, "that was unexpected.